Good evening to all of you and welcome to this webinar. I'm so glad that you tuned in tonight to listen to Dr. Dale Bredesen, Julie Gregory, and Lance Kelly, our friends from the United States of America, because they're bringing good news. Now, I want to tell you why I'm so glad that you tuned in tonight. Earlier today, I watched a movie to kill a bit of time, and the movie was on Alzheimer's, and it's called Live Twice and Love Once. Now, I just want to picture one scene that I saw on the movie, and this was the doctor who did all the necessary tests on the patient, and eventually he called the patient in, and he sit down with him, but he find it difficult to start speaking. You can feel he's feeling uncomfortable. Eventually, he says to the patient, "Sir, I have bad news for you because you have Alzheimer's disease." And now the patient sits quietly without saying much. Eventually, the patient speaks up and he says, "Okay, doc, so what's the solution?" And now the doctor stays quiet, and you can see he doesn't really have an answer. And after a while, he said to the patient, "There is no solution." Now, ladies and gents, that's why I'm glad that you're here tonight, because there is indeed a solution. And I want to thank Dr. Bredesen and Julie and Lance to South Africa. We're very grateful for that. And with that, it's over to Dr. Bredesen and Lance and Julie. And please enjoy the message that they bring, because they bring hope to us and a solution. And that is a lot to be thankful for. So thanks, Lance, Dr. Bredesen, and Julie. It's over to you.
My name is Lance Kelly. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Apollo Health. Very glad to be with you tonight. My father died of Alzheimer's around 4 years ago, which is one of the driving forces that caused me to choose to refocus my career, which originally was in consumer technology products in Silicon Valley, to work on technologies that are combining Dr. Bredesen's years of medical research with our software team to create products to help prevent and reverse cognitive decline and make his solutions accessible to everyone all over the world. I have two very special people to introduce to you today. The first is Julie G. Julie is an Alzheimer's activist with hope. Julie was once told that there was no hope for someone in her condition. And since that time, and she's going to tell you her very, very compelling story a little later, she's reversed her cognition and is now our Chief Health Liaison at Apollo. Julie also collaborated very closely with Dr. Bredesen to write the handbook portion of his second best-selling book, The End of Alzheimer's Program. Julie is the founder and president of APOE4.info, which is a nonprofit grassroots organization of APOE4 carriers working to prevent and reverse Alzheimer's disease. And you'll learn more about what APOE4 is from Dale's presentation here shortly. Julie is here today to share her personal journey. So thank you very much, Julie. I know you'll be up after Dale, but thanks in advance. I met Dr. Bredesen around 6 years ago at a lunch in Los Angeles. At that time, I was running a mobile application development startup company in the entertainment business up here in Silicon Valley, where we're based. Dr. Bredesen and I got to chatting, and I found out he was this world-renowned researcher in Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases. So really, to make a very long story short, we've been working together ever since on our company, Apollo Health, which is basically bringing his research on Alzheimer's to the public. What makes the combination of Dr. Bredesen's medical research team and the product technology team here at Apollo so unique is that it's really one of the first successful attempts at bridging the gap between technology and healthcare. We have essentially taken his very complicated protocol and have created an advanced piece of technology and community around supporting participants on their journey to reversing memory loss and improving their brain health. A little bit more about Dr. Bredesen's background. He graduated from Caltech and earned his MD from Duke University Medical Center. He served as chief resident in neurology at UCSF before joining Nobel laureate Stanley Prusner's laboratory at the National Institute of Health as a National Institute of Health postdoctoral fellow. He has held faculty positions at UCSF, UCLA, and UCSD. Dr. Bredesen directed the program on aging at the Burnham Institute before going to the Buck Institute in 1998 as its founding president and CEO. Dale's currently our Chief Technology Officer for Apollo, the company he and I formed together. And with that, Dale, I will let you take it away.
Thanks very much,
Welcome.
Len. Thank you, Willem. And thank you, Julie. Thank you, everybody. Let me just share the screen here. All right, so we've all been embroiled in a pandemic for just over a year now. And this has taken the lives of many. And here in the United States, over 400,000 people have died from COVID-19. And just for perspective, about 100 times that many, so over 40 million people in the United States of the currently living people in the United States will die of Alzheimer's disease. It is now in the United States the third leading cause of death. So we started 30 years ago. I ran a laboratory for 30 years looking at the phenomenon of neurodegeneration. How does it work? What are the molecular drivers? If we can understand the fundamental nature, we have a much better chance of making an impact on this previously untreatable and unpreventable disease. And so let me show you the data we have collected over those years. Here's from when I was traveling on a plane from San Francisco across to London to give a talk. And I happened to pick this up, and you can see here, this was about one of the very first Concorde pilots who had committed suicide. And why had he committed suicide? Because he had just killed his wife. And why had he killed his wife? Because he was told that she had Alzheimer's and that there was nothing that could be done about this. So this is the sort of thing that we want to avoid. We want to make it so that this story, we never hear this sort of story again. And as I mentioned, this is a huge, huge problem. I'm actually currently on the state of California governor's brain task force for looking at what can be done about this as what they call the brain trust. So let me just summarize very quickly the basics here. First of all, our laboratory goal over the last 30 years has been to understand what actually Alzheimer's is. And that might sound a little crazy, but we want to understand the fundamental nature of this, because the attempts to treat this in the past have all been treating it blindly. It's a little bit like saying, we want to put a man on the moon, and so we're going to take our rocket ship and we're going to point it randomly and hope that it lands on the moon. That simply does not work. So what we're saying is you actually have to look at all the different variables. So where's the moon going? How quickly is it going there? How fast is it rotating? Can we make adjustments as we go? All of these things to get an effective landing. And that's the same thing we're doing with people with cognitive decline. Our lab findings over the last 30 years are, we have 227 peer-reviewed publications that give us for the first time a model of Alzheimer's that tells us how to prevent it, how to reverse the problem. And of course, the earlier, the better. Just as in cancer, the earlier you treat it, the better. And the idea of treatment then that comes directly from the test tube, that comes out of the research over the last 30 years, instead of giving a Procrustean, uniform treatment with a single drug, which has nothing to do what's actually causing the decline. We want to flip the script here. We want to evaluate for each person the reasons that a person is either at risk for cognitive decline or is actually undergoing cognitive decline. Then we want to target those things. And if you think about it for a moment, you'll see that that actually makes much more sense than going at it blindly. And as I'll show you, that's what actually has turned out to work. We've just finished the first clinical trial that actually uses this approach. It actually goes at what is actually causing it, identifies those factors, and then drives those, and then it actually targets those. And it's worked very, very well. So let me just show you the most basic, the fundamental biology of how this actually works. You have in your brain a master switch that actually looks, this is a molecule that is sitting in your neurons, especially near the synapses, the connections of those neurons, that is called APP, amyloid precursor protein. It's the precursor to the stuff, the amyloid stuff that collects in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's disease. But in fact, this parent, this APP, is present in all of us at actually relatively high levels for a membrane protein. And this thing actually sticks, it's essentially sampling outside of each of your cells. Here's the membrane of the cell. This is what's holding the cell. It's like a sac. This is what's holding the molecules inside the cell. Here's outside, here's inside. And so this thing actually sticks through, as you can see, most of it's outside the cell, a little bit's inside the cell. Well, this thing actually senses the environment of your cell. And it's essentially saying, are things good? And what it does is it acts like the president of your country. It's saying when things are good, we have enough support. There aren't major wars going on. There isn't major pollution. There isn't major inflation. Then we can go ahead and build. We can build new bridges. We can build new interactions with other countries. We can build new roads. All of those sorts of things. And again, the same sort of thing that we're all dealing with here now in the pandemic world. When can we do appropriate things? When do we need to rescue? So this thing responds to all these different signals, your hormones, your growth factors, your nutrients, whether you have pathogens, whether you have inflammation in your brain. So when things are good, this thing actually responds, and it actually gets cut by a molecular scissors at one place, and it gives you two pieces. And as you can see, one of the pieces is outside here. This is called SAPP alpha. One of the pieces is inside, and this says things are good. You can make and store new memories. And this is happening moment by moment for all of us. On the other hand, when things are bad, when you have ongoing toxicity, you're exposed to various toxins, you're exposed to various pathogens, and all sorts of pathogens get into our brains. In Alzheimer's patients, for example, a number of labs have described the findings of mouth bacteria in the brains of patients with Alzheimer's disease. Also, herpes simplex from your lip, which gets into the brain in Alzheimer's disease. Also, various fungi from your sinuses that can get into the brain. Also, various other organisms from your body that can all get in there. Your body fights these by saying, okay, I have to go from a growth mode to a protective mode. And here's the protective mode. So now this same molecule, this same master switch gets cut at 3 different sites, here, here, and here. And now you have 4 different pieces that say just the opposite. Instead of growing and making new synapses, we're going to pull back and we're going to be in a protective mode. And we're going to downsize. So it's literally saying we can't afford to make new memories. We're going to use what we have. And the good news is, by the time we're adults, we have many memories and we can do a lot of things. We can do our jobs, we can do our reading, we can do all sorts of things. But as you can imagine, the first thing that begins to go is the storage of new memories, which is typical with early Alzheimer's disease. So what we call Alzheimer's disease is actually a protective response that your brain makes to all sorts of insults, dozens and dozens of infections, toxins, poor nutrition, ongoing inflammation, poor growth factors, hormones, all of that. So our job in treating it and preventing it is to identify for each person what are the things that are insufficient. What this really tells you is that Alzheimer's disease, at its most fundamental, is an insufficiency. It's telling you that there's not enough of something to deal with what's going on. What that means is, because there are all these different things, the perfect Alzheimer's drug, and we spent years in the laboratory developing Alzheimer's drugs, the perfect drug would have to do that. And you can see that is a very, very tall order for a single drug. So in fact, Alzheimer's drugs are going to be very helpful when we use them on the backbone of a comprehensive program that deals for each person with what's actually causing the problem. And that's the future. It's a completely different way to think about this disease and to deal with this disease. So I want to show you a couple of examples. Here's Edward. Edward actually came at the end of 2013, so he's now over 7 years on the program, and you can see here how well he's done here. For example, here's California Verbal Learning Test, gone marked improvements here, total recognition of hits, auditory delayed memory, reverse digit span, on and on. He's done very, very well for over 7 years. And that's the best news. The people who improve on this sort of program can continue their improvement because they're actually dealing with what's actually causing the problem instead of treating it blindly. Let me show you another example. Here's Marcy, who's doing very well. And not only has she done well with her cognition, as you can see, but the actual volume of her hippocampus, the critical region in the brain, a region that's affected early in Alzheimer's, has actually increased in size as she has done better. Here's another example. Here's a guy who came in several years ago with, quote, senior moments. And this guy actually had early Alzheimer's disease. Both his parents had died with Alzheimer's disease. He had the common Alzheimer's risk gene, ApoE4. If you have 0 copies of that risk gene, and everybody should know their status, just as you want to know your blood pressure or your cholesterol or things like that. And if you have 0 copies, your chance through your lifetime of getting Alzheimer's, about 9%. If you have a single copy, as this person did, it's about 30%. And if you had 2 copies, then it's well over 50%. It's more likely that you will get it than you will avoid it. This person already had a markedly positive amyloid PET scan, as well as another PET scan, which is called FDG, which looks at the metabolism of your brain. His hippocampus had already begun to shrink, and his neuropsych testing showed that he was already in late stage MCI. So you can see here, if you look for what are the insults, why did this person actually have this problem? And you can see here, he had a high hsCRP. That simply means he has a lot of inflammation. He has a very poor methylation, which is why his homocysteine is high. His vitamin D is very low. His hormones low, his testosterone was low, his thyroid was low, and he responded absolutely beautifully to what we call RECODE, and we've developed with Lance that you heard from earlier. Of course, we want to have appropriate algorithms and software to understand why each person is developing the problem. This person has done very, very well. And in fact, his hippocampus actually increased. His neurologist pointed out he's back to normal. And here's an example where you can see here, after he was treated for 10 months, his fasting insulin improved, his hsCRP improved. It's not perfect yet. We'd like to see it below 1. His is still at 3. His homocysteine was better, his vitamin D was better, and he went from struggling to working full time. And interestingly, you can see here, his hippocampus went from shrunken to actually larger than an average hippocampus. So he's done very, very well. And actually, the gray matter in his brain increased by 23%. So he's done very, very well on the program. So we published in the lab 227 papers, but let me show you a couple of these are peer-reviewed papers that came out. This first one here from 2014 was just the first example in history where we can show that we can actually make people better. And we had data on only 10 people at that time. In 2016, we published a second one that was an additional 10 people, where we now had more documentation, more data on MRIs and PET scans and things like that. And then here, finally, 2018, we published 100 patients who had this. And as I'll show you in just a couple of moments, we've just finished the first clinical trial in history in which, instead of predetermining what's going to be treated for each person, we actually ask for each person, what are the drivers, and
Wat ons
then
hoor,
target those.
werk jou nou, praat hy by jou. Jy sien myne is nou weer af.
Okay. Well, okay. So I want to tell you a little bit about the trial that I just mentioned. So as I said, this is the first trial in which, instead of predetermining a treatment, we target the identified problems. This is a small proof of concept trial supported by the Evan Thea Foundation. I'm doing this with Doctors Anne Hathaway, Kat Toops, and Deborah Gordon. This compares the protocol that we developed to historical outcomes for standard of care, and we identify all the different things. And what I can tell you now, this will be published actually in the next couple of months, but the majority of people actually got better on this treatment. And for perspective, just 2 weeks ago, Eli Lilly, the drug company, made a big announcement that they had a major success with their drug, which is called donanemab. Now, that drug did not make people better. It did not stop the decline, but all it did was it actually reduced the decline by 32%. So about a third slowing of the decline. In contrast, in our studies, we actually made people better and had them stay better. So huge difference between what is out there right now and what we're achieving with this result. So the bottom line here is Alzheimer's disease should actually be a rare condition. Everybody should be evaluated. If you have no symptoms, we've developed what's called pre-code. So for no symptoms, you want to get on appropriate prevention if you are 45 years of age or older, and especially if there is any family history of dementia. On the other hand, if you already have begun symptoms, please get in as early as possible and get on reversal. And we see, again, people improving all the time. The longer you wait, the later, the harder it is. And yes, we have had some people with MoCA scores of 0, that is to say, very late stage Alzheimer's, who've had some improvement, but it's much harder, it's much more complicated. And typically when they improve, they don't come all the way back to normal, they improve. They can dress themselves again, or they can interact, they can speak again, things like that. So we recommend, please, everybody, get in as early as possible on prevention or early reversal, because early on we see tremendous success. Virtually everybody with subjective cognitive impairment, SCI, gets better. The majority of the people with MCI, mild cognitive impairment, get better, and some of the people with full-on Alzheimer's disease. So just to summarize then, we all can work together to make this a rare disease. What we call Alzheimer's disease actually turns out to be the result of a protective response to a number of different insults that you have over the years. And in fact, as I said earlier, this is really about the phenomenon of insufficiency. You don't have enough support for what's required to make a large brain work, so you start downsizing until you have enough support for that size brain. One of the things we discovered going along with looking at what's all driving this is that there are different subtypes. So there are people who have inflammation as the main driver of Alzheimer's. There are other people that have glycotoxicity, things like insulin resistance and glucose-related damage to the brain as their main driver. There are other people that actually have toxicity as their main driver. So there are different subtypes. And the bottom line here is that things are changing. We can now understand this disease better, which is what we spent so many years in the laboratory doing. We can now look to see what's actually driving this and address those things. Also, this should be applicable, the same approach, to other neurodegenerative diseases. We've now started with people who have macular degeneration, people who have Parkinson's disease, people who have Lewy body disease, people who have amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or Lou Gehrig's disease, to do this same sort. The neurochemistry is different for each of these diseases. So the bottom line here is we should be able to reduce the global burden of dementia markedly and ultimately chronic illness in general. Not just that, but to improve the performance. So we see people who go on this sort of program who actually improve their normal cognition as they do the right thing. As we get larger data sets, as we understand what's actually driving this disease better. This is, as I said earlier, a very common illness, and we can, working together, we can actually make this a rare illness. So just as for leprosy, people I'm sure are aware, at one time, leprosy was a true scourge. The big scourge right now, of course, is the pandemic, is SARS-CoV-2. Polio was a scourge in the 1950s. And Alzheimer's is a current scourge, and as I said, will kill about 100 times in the US, about 100 times as the number that have currently died from the pandemic. This shall become a former scourge, and it's up to us to get appropriate tests and to get appropriate therapy and prevention to make this the rare disease that it should be. So let me turn things over to Julie. And let me just mention, and Julie, I'm sure will talk about this as well. We talked earlier about the common Alzheimer's risk gene, which is ApoE4, and that if you have 2 copies, it's more likely that you will develop Alzheimer's than that you will escape it. And so Julie is a perfect example, and there are 7 million Americans who have 2 copies. There are 75 million Americans who have 1 copy of this gene. And Julie has done absolutely spectacularly. And so Julie, with that, let me turn it over to you as a citizen scientist. So Julie, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm here today to spread a message of hope, and I'm so grateful to Willem that we can bring this to all of you. I want to let you know that the protocol really works, and my story is just one of many. When I was about to turn 50, which was almost 9 years ago now, I took part in genetic testing through 23andMe, and I learned that I carried 2 copies of the apolipoprotein gene that Dr. Bredesen just referred to, the epsilon 4 variant. So at that time, statistically, the most prevalent paper said I had a 90% chance of developing Alzheimer's. And as if that wasn't terrifying enough, I was already exhibiting symptoms of cognitive decline at that time. I never in a million years at age 50 would have attributed it to Alzheimer's. I thought it was stress, perimenopause, my fast-paced lifestyle, but this caused me to take a very hard look at my cognition. I took part in online cognitive testing because a part of me still didn't believe that this was real. And I fully expected that my score would be somewhere in the 70th percentile, but I scored in the mid 30th percentile for my age group. I still didn't believe it. I repeated the testing and I got the same result. I finally turned to my husband, who's my rock, and I said, hey, I've got this high-risk genetic variant. I feel like I'm struggling. I'm having way too many senior moments for someone who's 50. And instead of offering me reassurance, which is what I was looking for, he said, well, that explains a lot. I then sought out the most esteemed neurologist in my area, and I told him about my high genetic risk and the symptoms I was having. And when I got to the point in my appointment where I said to him, what can you do to help me prevent symptoms from getting worse? He said, good luck with that. I came home and I still didn't believe there was nothing I could do. So I turned to the Alzheimer's Association, and their website at that time said Alzheimer's can't be prevented. It's incurable, it's untreatable, it's progressive, and most patients are dead within 10 years. As you can imagine, this was a very dark period for me. But what ended up saving me was the fact that I had this little voice in my head saying, this can't be right. I'm only 50 years old. There must be something I could do. And 23andMe provided online community forums where all of these people from all over the world who just learned about their high genetic risk could gather. And we formed a community, a wonderful support system for one another. But we also took a very deep dive into the science. We consulted with experts. We read every journal article we could get our hands on. I certainly wasn't a scientist, but I had a medical dictionary in one hand and journal articles in the other. And as I began to learn about possible things that were being uncovered and possible strategies that I could use to turn things around, I began to implement them. I began tracking specific biomarkers that were in the scientific literature at the time. I began checking my fasting glucose, my fasting insulin, my homocysteine level, my vitamin D level. I radically changed my diet. I threw away all processed and packaged foods. I began to eat a nutrient-dense, whole food diet. I changed the way I exercised. I had exercised throughout my life in fits and starts. And at that particular time, I was engaging in a very intense boot camp style exercise that was very, very stressful. And so instead, I began to take a long daily walk where I would just amble for hours, sometimes 4, 5, 6 miles. I interspersed that with running. I did some strength training. For the first time in my life, knowing my ApoE4 homozygote status, I recognized my fragility and I prioritized myself. I made sure that I got 7 to 8 hours of quality restorative sleep every night. I began to actively acknowledge and manage my stress. I started meditating for the first time. And as you can imagine, I was fighting for my very life. I also did a lot of praying. I also challenged my brain. I began brain training. And if I didn't score well on a particular day, I did something that I don't recommend that you all do. I stayed with it until I beat my score from the day before. So I was actively challenging my brain to learn. I also began to avoid toxins when I recognized the danger that air pollution presented. For instance, I ensured that the air in my home was clean. I was drinking clean water, eating clean food, organic when possible, and even the toiletries and cosmetics that came in contact with my skin. I looked at the Environmental Working Group Skin Deep database to choose the safest products available. And I also began taking targeted supplements. Curcumin was the first one I began taking, and the effect was unbelievable. I must have had an extraordinarily high level of inflammation because once I began taking curcumin, it was almost like a fog lifted immediately. And as I learned about more supplements, I began to take them in a very strategic and smart way. I repeated this cognitive testing about 1 year later, and my scores had gone from the mid 30th percentile for my age group to the mid 90th percentile for my age group. I could feel things change. Whereas once I was driving in the city I'd lived in for 20 years and I would get lost or not recognize people who knew me very well, all of those symptoms went away. And what was even more exciting was that people in this community that I had formed, I took the group from 23andMe, brought it to my own website, which is a nonprofit called apoe4.info, were also experiencing similar improvements. At this time, I stumbled across Dr. Bredesen's 2014 paper, Reversal of Cognitive Decline, a novel therapeutic program. And I literally wept tears of joy because here was a well-respected neuroscientist who had proven that he could reverse cognitive decline in 9 out of 10 of the case studies at that time using very similar strategies to those I and members of my community had used. Yes, he was using them in a much more targeted way, and the way that I use the protocol was much more of a kitchen sink approach, but it worked. And I reached out to Dr. Bredesen that same day with an email, and I was stunned when he called me later that same day. And he was an enormous supporter of the APOE4.info project, and we've been collaborating together in one way or another ever since. I was honored to help him write his recent book, The End of Alzheimer's Program, with his integrative physician wife, Dr. Aida Lashine Bredesen. The part of the book that I worked on is the handbook, and that basically provides essentially step-by-step instructions for how to follow the protocol. And Lance, if you wouldn't mind bringing up our graphic of the B7, I want to leave you all with a something tangible that you can begin doing today. This is what we call the B7 or the Bredesen 7. And these are essentially the 7 broad strategies that when put together, they work synergistically together to create neuroplasticity, which is the ability of the brain at any age to heal and to create new synapses and new synaptic connections. And any of these strategies alone has the ability to do that. When you put them all together, it's extraordinarily powerful. The most important strategy to us is nutrition. We use a diet called the Keto Flex 12-3 diet. This is a nutrient-rich, plant-heavy diet that emphasizes clean, seasonal vegetables, non-starchy from every color of the rainbow, an adequate amount of protein, and lots of healthy fats. And I'm not talking about butter and bacon necessarily. I'm talking about high polyphenol extra virgin olive oil, avocados, nuts, and seeds. Keto Flex 12-3 is a big name. Keto refers to the fact that it's mildly ketogenic. Flex refers to the fact that it promotes metabolic flexibility. It allows the brain to use both glucose and fat as fuel. It also is flexible in that it's appropriate for vegetarians and for omnivores. And 12-3 refers to the fasting portion. We want everyone to fast for a minimum of 12 hours a day. I fast for considerably longer, with at least 3 hours before bed. The exercise portion, we want you to move more throughout the day. One dedicated exercise session is not enough. We want you to look for opportunities to incorporate more steps into your day. When you're running errands, park far away from the shops you're going to. Never use an escalator or elevator. Always take the stairs. Do your own chores in your home. Look for ways to keep moving. On top of that, you need to engage in daily aerobic exercise, a long daily walk outside. There's something very healing about being in nature. I live on the shores of Lake Michigan. We have 6 inches of snow now, expecting more later. No weather stops me. So get outside every single day. And strength training is also extraordinarily important. We want you to do some strength training 3 to 4 times a week. Sleep, prioritize yourself. Adopt a sleep hygiene program that enables you to get 7 to 8 hours of quality restorative sleep every night. Manage stress. Chronic acute stress is very damaging to your brain. So adopt a stress management program, whether it's mindfulness, meditation, prayer, yoga, whatever works for you. Stimulate your brain, engage in brain training, socialize with others, look for opportunities to learn new things. I don't know if this is an American phenomenon, but in America, when people retire, they like to sit in these lazy boy recliners and watch TV. That's the last thing you should be doing. Retirement is a time to do all the things you never had time to do before. Learn a new language, learn a musical instrument, challenge your brain. Detox is next. We know that toxins can profoundly affect our brains. Breathe clean air, drink clean water, eat clean food. We're learning that mold in particular has a very harmful effect. And last but not least, supplements, while they are supplemental, are very important if you have a nutrient deficiency. So Dr. Bredesen has set biomarker goals for various nutrient levels and has recommendations on specific supplements that we can take that are very targeted to what each individual needs. All of these things together can help to prevent and reverse cognitive decline within the context of the protocol, where you're identifying what's driving or potentially driving the cognitive decline. And we do this through a series of blood tests. We ask you to fill out a medical questionnaire, and we have you do some cognitive testing. But on top of identifying and addressing the specific contributors, the B7 is fundamental to healing everything. The most important takeaway that I want to leave you with today is that there is hope. We must change this false paradigm that nothing can be done. The pathology behind Alzheimer's takes at least a decade, likely several decades to develop, and this very long prodromal period gives us an opportunity to intervene. And the sooner we act, the sooner we can begin applying this approach, and you can protect and enhance your cognition for years to come. Dr. Bredesen or Lance or Willem, would you like to say a final word?
Let me just mention what you had said earlier, Julie, and thank you very much, about everyone being evaluated. And so we recommend that just as people, when we turn 50, we're all told we should have a colonoscopy. Everybody knows when you turn 50, you should have a colonoscopy so you can reduce your likelihood of developing colorectal cancer or of dying from colorectal cancer. But by the same token, when we are 45 or older, we recommend a cognoscopy. And that's a very simple thing to do. There are three pieces to it. Number one, as you said, it has some specific blood tests. So we're looking at, do you have ongoing inflammation? Do you have insulin resistance? Do you have specific toxins? Do you have reduction in methylation? All sorts of things. There are dozens and dozens of things. We tell patients, imagine a roof with 36 holes in it. A drug is a very good patch for one hole, but there are 36 of them. So we want to look at all these different things. So it's blood testing. Number two, it is, as you said, a simple online cognitive assessment. Let's see where you stand. If you're having problems, please get on treatment immediately. And then third, if you have no symptoms, then don't worry about getting an MRI. But if you already have symptoms, it's a good idea to have an MRI imaging your brain to see if you've begun to have this shrinkage that often occurs in the hippocampus of people, a specific brain region of people who have Alzheimer's disease. So please, everyone, consider getting a cognoscopy and check to see where you stand and check to see what your risk factors are so that we can make this a rare disease. And Willem, do you want to say anything else before we wrap this up, or Lance?
Yes, I want to thank all three of you for a wonderful session and bringing hope to us. Lance, we will send out another email pretty soon, and hopefully we will have a recording of the video of the seminar so that we can send it out to people if they want to pass it on to other people. We would be grateful for that. We will also send the contact details, and if you want to contact me, you please do so that we can take it further for those who really feel that they can benefit from what we have to offer. There was a lot of people who tuned in tonight, and this is wonderful. So let's start spreading the message. And again, thanks for the help you're bringing to South Africa. This is great. So good night to all of you. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much, Willem.